Hi listeners, Puka here. A quick notice that this episode talks about neurodiversity and ableism in the context of Changeling, so if those topics are difficult for you to hear about, please feel free to skip this one. Secondly, it wasn't until preparing the audio that we realized we hadn't mentioned the essay Disabled in the Dreaming, found in the introduction of the Changeling 20th Anniversary Player's Guide and written by deaf-blind writer and storyteller Elsa Sionison Henry. If you have access to this book, we highly encourage you to give it a read, as it's wonderfully written and touches on the same topics we discuss here. Thanks very much, and now on with the show. This is Changeling the Podcast.
Welcome to Changeling the Podcast. Come for the glamour, stay for the vibes. I'm your host, Josh, and with us is your other host, Puka. Say hi, Puka.
Ahoy, hoy.
What are we talking about tonight, Puka?
Kind of going off a little bit from our usual purview and having another theme episode, or maybe allegory episode is a better term for this one, but we're going to be talking about neurodiversity and ableism in relation to Changeling.
Yeah, I think this is kind of like our queer themes.
Yeah, similar in many ways.
Yeah.
We should probably start with a few content warnings and disclaimers. All the content warnings. We will be talking about issues of mental health and discrimination. So if you're not into that, you're welcome to skip this episode. But if you do listen, we will hopefully give you some interesting food for thought.
Yeah.
Also, we are not psychiatrists or mental health professionals of any kind that I know of.
Hey, I took 2 first-year undergrad courses. Okay.
It's 2 more than I took.
Yep.
Do we want to at all mention, like, personal...
I don't even know. I keep coming across people going, oh, you have this disability. I'm like, oh, yeah, I do. I've had that for 20 years. I never thought about it as a disability. So I'm pretty sure I'm neurodivergent. I don't know who isn't, though.
Well, that's kind of the point, isn't it?
Yeah. I don't know. That's one of the neurodivergence versus neurotypical is a thing I see lots of takes on, and I don't quite understand what the.
I have my take, but why don't you start with yours? And
I don't know. It's just words. Okay, I've been diagnosed with ADHD. I've been told I have autism by my mental health professionals, but it was like an offhand comment. Anyway, or that I'm autistic. I have autism. Lots of people in my life do too. I've been struggling with chronic depression for basically ever. Lots of medications for these things. That's where it is. And like physical disabilities. I mean, the ones that are strongly impacting. I'm now diabetic, osteoarthritis, sleep apnea. Those are probably the most impactful things for me. But I have diagnoses. But
yeah, from my side, I too have gotten the offhand, "Yo, you're probably autistic" comment, and
this was the I am autistic. Of course, you're autistic, and blah blah blah. What?
Well, a mental health professional told me that were I their patient, they would probably diagnose me with it.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the circumstance. And on top of that, I mean, any number of random quirks, I guess we can call them.
So we like playing role-playing games. There we go.
And then as well, I know I can't remember if I've ever mentioned it on the podcast, but having lost my hearing in 1 year recently and having been painfully nearsighted for most of my life.
Oh, that's again. I wear glasses as corrective tool that never gets brought up because it's like socially acceptable. But
so yeah, I mean, when I say like this is what it's all about anyway, the reason why I like the term neurodiversity rather than neurodivergent or neurotypical is because it is that recent relanguaging of the idea, and it points to how having these different, patterns of behavior and patterns of cognition, seeing that diversity as normal rather than abnormal. Because when you say typical and divergent, the implication is that there's some standard, which is like artificial, that everyone is being measured against. And if you're divergent, therefore you have a problem,
You know, you're the first. This comment, I realized I'd been conflating neurodiversity and neurodivergence this whole
Oh
time.
no,
So thank you for clearing that up for me.
right on. So yeah, I think terminology wise, I like it as a blanket
Hmm.
for really pointing to how there probably is nobody who's neurotypical in the same way that there's all of these ideologies around the unmarked aspects of the self. Like, what does it
Yeah.
mean to be normal? Such a thing doesn't exist.
Yeah, and you try to do that, and that's how you end up with like across the world, the normal person's like 50.4% female.
Hmm.
Is it like you can't?
Has 2.5 children,
Yeah,
etc.
yep. Anytime you break it down to a number, you're super oversimplifying. If you break it down to like three numbers, you're still simplifying because actuality is complicated. But sometimes, if you understand the purpose, breaking something down to like what's the
Yeah.
deviation from the mean, like that could be useful, but not in the way most people, just lay people, talk about it. It's useful for very specific contexts. We have to keep that context in mind.
The metric for me is kind of like for neurological or psychological states.
Hmm.
The question is, does it negatively impact the individual's life? And if
Yep.
so, is that negative impact the result of the condition itself or some kind of societal whatever around it?
And you often can't disentangle those two things.
No, of course. Yeah, it's very difficult
Yeah.
to.
Do we want to tie that into Changeling on that? Like,
Let's.
there's a lot about Changeling that fits this.
Yeah.
For instance, oh, what's the word for it? What you were talking about, where you have a disability, but it's because the societal impact of whatever traits you have that are making it a disability, not innate to you. What's the word for that?
Well, I know that there's the social, what is it, the social paradigm of
Yeah, social versus
social
medical
model of
paradigm.
disability. That's it.
But that ties in a lot to banality triggers.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that I like about C20 in particular is the introduction of antithesis as that personalized banality trigger
Hmm.
to really highlight the distinction. Something that we briefly talked about with the Dark Ages Fae episode, which I think ties back in here, between then and now, from second edition to 20th, and with Lost in the middle, there seems to have been this sort of discursive shift in the way people talk about what Changeling and the Kiths in particular represent.
Mm-hmm.
My read on second edition is like, cool, you found this group of people that you're similar to, and they're your found family, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas now it seems like it's more about, cool, you found this group of people who recognize how unique you are. And I think both are valuable pieces. It's just a matter of foregrounding one or the other.
Could you elaborate on what the difference is there?
Well, I think that one, I hate to use these terms, but one is collectivist and one is individualistic.
Mm.
You know, that sense of what matters more. Is it the community and connection that you have with people, or is it your right to be seen for who you are?
Mm.
And I don't think they're mutually exclusive at all. I think it's just the
Not at all.
framing
Yeah.
people put around it. So something like antithesis to me is a way of kind of mechanizing the latter, as
Mm.
opposed to something like birthright and frailty. It's like, oh, all puka are like this, you know?
Yeah, I was thinking back like to first ed where it was like implied that most changelings just hang out with their own kith. And then
Yeah,
that sort of move to cross kith groups were very common.
yeah.
And that gets
It's been a slow shift. Maybe as the kiths like passed 100 in number, people figured you should probably have a little bit more interaction.
although yeah, that's cultural issues too, because a lot of
Yeah.
those are from
What do we think though about Changeling being an allegory for these things, either intentionally or unintentionally, maybe partially an allegory?
I like it. Like
Yeah.
they probably could find some example of it where it's not so great. And definitely I've seen other games trying to do something similar where it doesn't go well.
Call of Cthulhu.
Yeah,
No, I'm
well,
just
that's
kidding.
not an allegory. That's just a. But there's some. I like how Changeling does it for those parts. One of the big things that appeals to me about the. In fact, I'd say it's why I love the game, and it's not just some other fairy game I was kind of interested in.
Mm. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, like glamour and banality triggers. Not that they called them that back in the day, but like the whole trying to difficulty fitting in and what all the, like it explains so well struggles I have in my own life,
Mm.
and I like the framework it provides and the language to talk about it,
Hmm.
and way to sort of explore, if I'm playing or running games, like how I might navigate this in the real world, kind of thing.
Yeah. For me, it's a little bit. I think that the queerness as an allegory has always resonated with me a little bit stronger.
Mm,
Maybe because I've never been, formally diagnosed through the mental health system with anything. So my
yeah,
experience of divergence, if we want to call it that, is more from the gender construct side. Although, as many have pointed out, there does seem to be a high co occurrence of those two states. But
well,
putting that
and there's also the
aside,
whole medical history of medicalizing,
yes.
but I think there's definitely parallels there. Like you could
Yeah.
get caught up. I don't want to say all disability is like the fact that my joints hurt a lot. Like that's not a social thing as much as some other stuff going on, but there
Yeah.
is still a lot of that in disability, as you said. With the it,
Well, and there's a whole subset of queer theory that's called queer crypt theory. That's, I mean, dedicated to looking at the intersectionality of
yeah,
those two streams. So yeah,
yeah. But anything where society's making things hard for you
yeah.
because you're not ticking the right boxes, like that. Changeling does good at that, I think.
And there's this arc to the experience of it that I think Changeling maybe not models but echoes. So,
Hmm.
for example, if you're doing your prelude or whatever, your Changeling starts as a human, etc., and they first have this sense of being different without necessarily being able to articulate it. And whether that's inner or external, people treating you differently, it's that sense of displacement. Then there's that moment of awakening, the chrysalis, and it reminds me of, whether it's coming out to yourself or just someone giving you the language to describe how you feel, why you feel that difference.
Hmm.
It's that first explosion of understanding, and then you incorporate that into your sense of self, but in a way that is not going to be understood by everyone or appreciated by everyone or respected by everyone. And that has to factor into your choice of places you go, who you engage with, etc. So like
Hmm.
I see parallels there. I think also in the Discord discussion for this episode, this might have come up again. X-Men as another allegory for the outsider.
Hmm.
And the comment that I've made before that when I read X-Men and kind of when I read Changeling, I have the sense that it's speaking to me in a way that is at the same time exactly like and totally different from the way it's speaking to somebody else. And there's also people to whom it doesn't speak at all,
Yep.
who don't have this experience and it would be lost on them, this aspect of it.
Yep.
But I think that connection, um, that sense of connection between groups of people who have experienced that form of either minority identity or disenfranchised identity or whatever, that's
Yep.
that's in the air here.
Although there is one way that it's a bit more tied in than say with queer themes, where it's okay. There's queer changelings for sure, but like the with things like certain kith personalities or kith flaws
Mm.
or the frailties and things like some of those house issues. But like you know, you could say the puka kith is an example of neurodiversity, like or
Slander and calumny.
or the Boggin frailty or the Knocker frailty to some ways interacts with that, or like Slua having the sensory issues, or which are both good and their birthright is a frailty,
I mean, she
and
and the dreaming literally have the frailty empathic blindness. It's just like
yeah.
make of that choice what you will, but that definitely
Oh,
falls
now I'm
into
wondering about the autumn she is. That does that count as
the
disability?
separate issue.
You pick up stalkers too easily. But no, but there is a lot of that in there, right? That's
Yeah.
more front and center. But part of what does that to me is just makes it feel more, like we're talking about these found family groups. Well, actually, even my blood family's like this. Like it's full of people with different things going on, and you have different challenges that you're facing and different things like that. But you're all kind of still in one group.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And even though I'm not a psychologist, I know that there are the different branches that kind of attend to the cultural side or the social side as
Hmm.
opposed to the purely neurological side. And so much of it, I assume, so much of how you internalize and come to understand these facts about yourself is dependent on the level of level and kind of support that you get from your surroundings
Hmm.
in most cases.
Or just the frame of it, like how you conceive of it
Yeah.
has to be like I know what I like. Okay, I'm diagnosed with ADHD. I have plenty of other friends who've been diagnosed with ADHD, and there are commonalities and big differences to what my experiences are
Mm-hmm.
that aren't just the social, right? But part of it is the social, and part of it is like is it the same thing? Is it a related thing? I don't know. I don't know if that even makes sense, if that's even a real question.
Do you think that that fact, that acknowledgement of the differences between you and people who have the same diagnosis, do you think that mirrors the rising trend towards wanting to foreground individuality in the game environment?
No, because I'm not coming up with labels for it. It's more
No, no. Well,
recognizing,
that's kind of what I
yeah.
mean. Sort of, I think that over the last however many decades, as a society, I think we have made some progress in recognizing that a label that applies or is applied to like 10,000 people, there may be 10,000 different meanings of
Hmm.
that label.
Yeah.
And as that discourse, I keep using discourse because I teach discourse theory.
Hmm.
So it's like, but as that discourse rises, it's like it percolates into maybe role playing games.
Yeah, but I think that helps. I don't think that's individualism.
No, no, okay, yeah, that's fair. Not individualism, just
Yeah.
a recognition of the individual in a way that
Yeah.
previously has been less, or at least recently in our history has not been as.
Infinite diversity and infinite combinations. But
There you go.
yeah, but I can still say I'm within this community. I still fit within this community.
Yeah.
It's not like such a broad community that like everyone on the planet would fit into it by any stretch, right? But I can still
Hmm.
say I fit into this given community, even though I'm different from the other people in it. We're all different,
Hmm.
as opposed to gatekeeping or something, which feels more group oriented. Like, if you're not disabled in the way we're saying disabled, if your ADHD is the wrong kind of ADHD, whatever.
I can understand to some extent, when someone says I'm undiagnosed, and
Hmm.
I don't know if that gives one the right to affiliate with people who have been diagnosed in the same way. Do you think it does?
I think
Yeah.
it. I think it does totally. Yeah,
Maybe
I
it
think
depends.
there's well. Okay, so here's I'm going to say something controversial.
Okay.
I think medicine, including mental health, is a very hard field. So I'm not trying to
Mm.
insult doctors here, but I think most of them are not actually very good at it. I don't think I'm good at it either, right? But I don't think there's this we give this like at least the thing is saying, oh doc, listen to your mental health professional, listen to your doctor. I'm like, okay, yeah, they do know more, definitely more than the average person about this, but they're definitely not infallible.
Mm.
They definitely can misdiagnose or fail to diagnose. And I know that because I can go to one doctor, talk to them, and then later go to another doctor, and about the same condition, they'll say completely different things, even with the same test results, like talking about a physical thing or whatever. Like,
In my initial statement, maybe I wasn't
yeah.
clear. I have met many people who say about themselves without having consulted a medical professional, I have undiagnosed X.
Mm.
That's more what I'm talking about. So I don't know if that's something
Yeah.
specific
No,
in
I'm
your mind.
fine with that. I wish I
Okay.
had, because once I was diagnosed, like, definitely, I mean, it depends on what you're talking about. Like, if you're an adult and you're talking about autism, I don't think there's much point in seeing a mental health professional in most situations.
Mm.
If you're talking about ADHD, well, are you going to be getting medications or not, or needing some kind of accommodation for something?
Yeah.
If you're not needing those, if you don't need a doctor to sign a form for you, a legal form for you that you can't sign, I don't see the point of it either. But yeah, so like I am diagnosed with this thing, like, oh, I've found out I have dyscalculia or something. I might have dyscalculia because I'm realizing I'm talking to my mom who got diagnosed with it. I don't know if I
Yeah.
do. I don't think it matters,
Well,
but
yeah, ultimately that's what it comes down to is like, you know, but so for something that's medicated, isn't that part of an experience that you wouldn't be able to share necessarily?
yeah, but
Like,
medications. So there's so many people with ADHD that don't like. I respond only kind of okay to medication. Lots of people don't respond at all.
hmm,
Depression's the same way. Autism, there is no medication.
yeah.
Plenty of other things like my arthritis. I'm like, okay, there are medical interventions, but those are usually, at least for the level I'm at, from what I can tell, worse than the treatment's worse than the disease kind of thing. Like there's sleep apnea. Okay, I have a CPAP machine. you don't actually need a like I'm actually getting to the point where a lot of my stuff I'm not engaged with the medical system in it. It's not illegal to not, but just because it's easier and cheaper to do it on my own. I've also known people who get very made up conditions that I'm pretty sure are not a thing, and they get diagnosed by some sort of medical professional.
That's really what I'm pointing to, to what extent is that act of entering the medical system, any of these points that are like major points in the discourse
Yeah,
of getting a diagnosis, receiving treatment, whatever. I don't think there's like a right or wrong.
yeah.
I'm trying to think how to say this.
You talking about the shared trauma of having to go through the medical system, or?
Presumably, yeah, or some shared experience
Mm-hmm.
that not everybody with a certain condition would necessarily have.
Yeah, I think that's a thing that can come up, but I don't know if that would be the difference between a label. Like that feels like if you're going to a queer analogy, the difference between being raised in a very accepting, gender diverse, everybody's it's okay to be like everybody's very open, out, nobody's in the closet kind of society, versus a highly restrictive, like you can be executed for being gay society. Those will be very different experiences. I'm not going to say one's more legitimate than the other.
Yeah, no, I guess what I'm pointing to tie it into that would be more like if someone claimed queerness without.
I think you're probably thinking of the same problematic. I think the gatekeeping's not good.
Yeah, no,
That's
I
my.
mean it's I guess it is around gatekeeping, but I'm thinking of like maybe it's more of an external thing. Maybe less about
Hmm.
gatekeeping and more about the kinds of responses that people get. So like there are fashions, for example, which are seen as more or
Hmm.
less queer at different points. So like now we're seeing a lot more straight cis men being okay with makeup or earrings or like whatever. If someone were to do that, the way in which they get labeled is highly dependent on their surroundings, and therefore their experience of that same act differs kind of regardless of how they feel internally, or potentially regardless of how they feel internally.
Hmm.
So I think what I want to try and account for is the level of self knowledge somebody has, but in particular self
Yeah.
knowledge in relation to why and how their experiences might be different. I see it sometimes too with, I'm going to pull the generation card here now, kids, like with students sometimes. It kind of boggles their mind sometimes when I talk about things like, oh yeah, I remember when non-heterosexual sex acts were illegal, and they're like, wait, what? And I'm like, yeah, like it's just part of the experience. Or
Hmm.
remembering the AIDS
Wait a
crisis.
sec. What?
Yeah. Oh, down on this side of the border, the states in which
Oh.
sodomy was illegal played a direct part in my decision about where to go to university.
Oh. Was
So,
that like long after any of them were prosecuted, or was it?
well, no, it got struck down because there was a case to the Supreme
Oh.
Court that was being prosecuted.
Oh.
Lawrence versus Texas, where two men were having relations in the privacy of their home. A homophobic neighbor called the cops. The
Hmm.
cops busted in and arrested them for a felony, and they took it all the way up to the Supreme Court. And up until that decision came down, it was like 12 states or something, maybe more than that. It was technically a felony.
Mm.
And this is like the 21st century.
So here that was 1969. That's
Right,
what's.
exactly. Yeah. Well, and in many states here too, just not all of
Yeah.
them.
That's the difference. Canada only has one criminal code, so there's the big difference.
Nah. So like that being part of my experience and not part of yours.
Hmm.
And I mean, we could point to anything else. It's like those, you have the wider cultural things, and then from a more, I don't know, smaller scale, it's just the passage of time. Like, after a while, everybody's experience of the society they live in is going to be different.
Hmm. Okay, technically, what I was just saying, 2016 was the last of the edge cases got struck down in the
Oh,
court
good.
here. But like we're
Finally.
talking, I'm not going to get into the details, but like we're talking, never hasn't been prosecuted in a long time, and it's like complicated and would need
Yeah.
anyway.
We've kind of gone off in a tailspin onto the queer history here, so maybe that's
Yeah,
great.
yeah.
But overall, I think it still kind of applies to all of these cases where this is part of why I wish people did more work on their preludes, kind of attending to
Mm,
all of these factors of the personal inward, the immediate interpersonal and then the kind of collective broader society culture stuff, all of those play into what it means to be neurodivergent in one way or another, or indeed a changeling
Hmm.
in one way or another. So,
I have ideas to talk to you about that, but that's getting very off topic too. But
okay.
there's some life path systems from some role playing games you might want to look at as adapting
Ah,
instead of the whole blank page problem of writing a prelude.
aha.
Something more directed.
I've never had a problem with the blank page prelude, but
Yes,
that's me.
but you've probably seen players who do.
Oh, yes, for sure.
Yeah.
Anyway, changeling. This all also, of course, we could talk about glamour and banality in general as kind of forces. I mean,
Hmm.
autumn people, the mental health professionals that we get in the game, just reeking with
Yeah.
banality, most of them.
Yeah, and I'm gonna. I think we have a slight difference of opinion on those throughout.
Hmm.
I see what we got back in the day as part of a broader thing that the World of Darkness was doing at the time, where it's like, oh, we're dark and gritty, and we're going to focus on the dark and gritty things. Like, I don't think what we got, if it was in a broader context, would have been really that problematic.
Hmm.
The problem is, it's most of what we got about the mental health profession.
Yeah, through the lens of changeling.
Yeah, but if it was like, and this would maybe be a thing to explore further, and I think there should be a diversity of mental health
Yeah,
professionals and a different diversity of experience with them. Like, I don't think in general, if you just go through your chrysalis or you're going through your dream, if you're going through your dream dance, there's no one there you trust helping you. Like maybe some changeling contact you to tell you what's going on, and you think they're full of it, or maybe there's nobody has, and then you talk to your talk therapist about this. I think there's going to be raising some flags, and you might be
yeah.
going down a certain path, even with the most well-intentioned mental health professional. But
And it's that well-intentioned piece that's kind of the tricky bit, right?
yeah,
And that's, I mean, again, I don't have much, if any, direct experience of said profession. I mean, I've lived with some, but in
yeah,
terms of being a patient. And the litmus test for me is kind of like, are there any good ones, any good therapists,
yeah.
not skilled, but like moral, ethical, etc., in
Hmm.
the world of darkness? The only one I could think of in Changeling is at the start of Immortal Eyes, the novel, the Toy Box novel. The childling Morgan has a child psychologist that she sees
Hmm.
who does eventually refer her into a network, which is how like Stark and the Dauntain find them or whatever. But you get to see her kind of inner monologue, and it's clear that she's worried and she wants to help,
Yeah.
whatever. But aside from that, all of the rest of
I mean,
them were
there's
like,
also the satyr therapist, but that's a bit different.
oh yeah,
I
well,
think Keith Book Satyr's had one. That was Keith Book Satyr. I don't know, somebody who went through med school and stuff. And
yeah. So yeah, I think World of Darkness, yes, is certainly trying to present the worst of all worlds,
hmm.
but and this was also a discussion on the Discord. I have to wonder if it successfully rises to the level of satire. And even if it did,
Mm.
would it really fit in the
I don't
setting?
even think it's satire. I don't think it's trying to be.
I think it's no to both.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't even think it's really trying. Okay, it's the same thing that, this is gonna sound weird. The same thing that happens with like the nightly news, especially in the U.S., but even to some degree in Canada. Like when you watch the nightly, if you ever watch, pull out your antenna and watch the nightly news on TV, really touching into these young audience here.
What's an antenna?
I have one. I bought one for my
Oh,
TV.
nice.
Even if it's totally factually correct, everything they're saying, if they're only talking about the horrible things that are happening, you're going to get a very skewed perspective on the world.
Yeah.
And if the World of Darkness is only talking about the horrible stuff, gives you a skewed perspective, at least on the World of Darkness, I think. Like,
I mean, I think I'm more willing to accept that it is skewed that way than you are, maybe, because it is the
yeah.
world of darkness, and
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with somebody introducing a good therapist or other mental health professional into a game,
Hmm.
but good people are treated as exceptional in the world of darkness. And so that's,
Yeah. But I think the other thing that comes in with Changeling that's different from neurodiversity and ableism, like it looks similar, but it's different, is you can't actually talk about what's really going on unless your therapist is also a changeling or something.
yeah.
Like you can't actually explain what's going on. I guess you can enchant them, but like it's much harder. There isn't this wider social recognition that you exist at all, and you're one of the people. Your whole culture is trying to keep it quiet. Like that's a bit different. So
Yeah. And ultimately, maybe disclaimers we should have heavily talked about again. This is a game. Like,
yeah, yeah,
changelings don't have to be, positioned as neurodivergent or
yeah. It's an allegory in the sense it's another thing separate from neurodiversity, separate from queerness, separate from like these other like whatever ethnicity. It's this other category
yeah.
that resembles all these other things, has commonalities with them, but it's this whole other fictional category of identity that isn't the same as those other things.
You could probably make the claim folklorically even that changeling and changelings as a concept are more of a comment on the process of othering rather than any
Mm-hmm.
individual group, which is part of why so many groups seem to fit well into that
Yeah.
framework. I mean, historically, changelings, like that's the thing.
Yeah, I've actually realized that I accepted that changelings are a metaphor for autism. I don't remember if I actually did my homework on looking that up. Am I just getting that from some like Tumblr post?
I mean, it could be
It
both.
makes sense,
So it does make sense.
but
Yeah. Well, that notion of any child who
yeah.
seemed particularly unruly or unable or unwilling to
Mm-hmm.
conform to the mores of the time,
Yeah.
you know,
That could be a lot of things though.
like
Yeah.
calling women witches, like that
Mm-hmm.
that history of society using the supernatural as an excuse to ostracize and condemn anyone who didn't fit into the mold.
Oh, wait, is there a society where like changelings were a good thing? Because
Uh,
there was the thing with witches in certain periods in Europe.
there are societies where being neurodiverse is a good thing, but
Yeah, there wasn't like 12th century Albania. I was like, oh, you're a changeling. Cool. Uh,
I think the best you could maybe say is that as long as they thought it was only one of your ancestors in Ireland, maybe that was okay. Like, oh, that explains why you're so gifted. You just had
mm,
a changeling grandmother or something. It's like,
okay.
I'll take it as long as you're not going to throw me in a fire. Like,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, I think generally it is not seen as
Mm-hmm.
a good thing, but we're here to support.
Mm-hmm. So how do you actually like use this in a game? What we're talking about?
I mean, aside from just enriching the role playing,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that you need anything to mechanize it. I mean,
Yeah.
I can try to come up with a few things on the spot, but I do think it's enough of a justification to say this will give you more nuance to the way that you role play, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Yeah.
But yeah, beyond that, I mean, I definitely don't think we need to go down the road of like merits and flaws and stuff. Um,
Yeah.
I think it would be an interesting tie-in to something we've discussed before in passing, having something like resonance for glamour. Like the sensory experience of glamour really could use more attention to how it differs
Mm-hmm.
between characters, between contexts, between moments. Like I think it would provide an opportunity to highlight that connection.
I think one thing that's certainly not limited to just this topic, but very important in it is if a player wants to make a character who has a certain trait or identity or aspect of themselves in common, like let them be the expert on what it means to
Hmm.
have that.
Yeah.
If somebody makes use of a wheelchair in real life, defer to them on how wheelchairs work and what that involves and all that, or anything like that. Like,
Yeah.
which seems obvious, but I think it's a thing that I've seen come up so much in role playing game, like
Yeah.
in actual at actual tables. Like,
And if you don't have anyone who you know who is an expert, do respectful reading out
mm-hmm.
in the world.
Yep,
Meet people if you can. Do respectful reading if you can't.
yep. But I think the big thing is like for the people at the table, don't unless you're doing like an actual play that's hosted somewhere. All that really matters is what the people at the table are seeing. So that's who you should really focus the most on. But
I'm trying to think of a way to phrase this, but something like don't assume any experience is correct except your own. No, that's not
mm-hmm.
how I want to say it. Hang on.
No, that's not right
That's
either.
not, no, I'm trying to think
No,
of how to phrase it.
believe people when they tell you about their own experiences, or at least like they are the expert on themselves, not you.
Yes, yeah. You are an expert on yourself.
Yeah, but also you are not an expert on anyone but yourself.
Yeah, that's it. That's what I was trying to get to.
hmm Yeah, don't get cocky
That's
and don't do any self
yeah,
analysis because
don't
you're an
get
expert.
cocky,
Yeah, it's
kid.
like fine, you're an expert on yourself. That doesn't mean you should never evaluate yourself or think about things. But
Yes. Yeah.
Hmm.
Should we talk a bit about the physical side? Because we do also have
Yeah.
issues with that in the game. For example, House Dougal famously, when someone swears an oath to them, they immediately lose a limb, lose a sense, something of that nature. What do we think about this?
I'm unsure.
Hmm.
Like, they've definitely adjusted how they handle House Dougal over time, I believe, based on feedback and people with putting their own selves into this. But it's something that I've seen, like, among the sort of disability rights community and sort of like anti-ableism community, whatever.
Mhm.
I've seen such different opinions on the things it's touching on that I really don't know what to think. And I don't know, wearing glasses or my CPAP machine or something. Like, I don't have a hearing aid. I don't use a cane. I don't
Yeah.
use a wheelchair. I don't like this is, I don't have a prosthetic limb. So I don't know what to make of these things. Like, in terms of, is it a good handling or not?
Well, as you said, you're an expert on nobody but yourself.
Hmm.
So you only have your own experiences and the physicality of them to draw on to
Yeah.
understand that experience.
There's nothing about it that jars against my own experience, but it's also not that similar to my own experience. So.
Yeah. Well, when I think about representation in the game, because at the very least, I want to distinguish House Dougal from like House Baelor, where
Hmm.
they have pride in their horns and their I don't know whatever else,
Yeah.
and I want to separate those two things.
Yeah, I would have
You know,
kept them more separate from the beginning. It's like House Baylor's just tieflings from D&D.
well,
And
and the fact that they kind of point to like, oh, they're kind of cousins. I'm like, this is weird.
yeah, and the stuff about how they pretend to be House Dougal, like, I think C20's kind of been moving away from that, and that's, I want to
Yeah.
extend how far away that is to not make them, they're very different things. And then they kept, like, part of the thing is they really kept drawing into, I have no idea how accurate it is. I've done, like, read it from sources about, like, ableism in Celtic culture, like class, like the old
Oh
school, like,
well, I mean, in a
yeah,
lot of in a lot of cultures,
yeah,
ancient Greek culture, where they would leave the babies out to be exposed if they were
yeah,
deformed in any way. Yeah.
yeah. Or it's, but it made it seem like even if, like, you had suffered an injury in battle, that would still exclude you from office or something.
Yeah, the king had to be physically perfect or something like that.
Yeah.
No blemish. That's why Brace the Beautiful was able to become king.
And I'm like, this is a role playing game. I don't know if we really need to bring that in to change, or maybe we could. I don't know. Or just highlight how much messed up the she are through it.
Yeah. Again, probably wasn't intended to be a satire, but it sometimes seems like it's trying to be.
Yeah. Well, the worst is when it sort of seems like a satire and sort of just seems like making fun of people.
Yeah. I think what bothers me the most is that House Balor is like the ones that practice radical self acceptance are the most evil of the bunch. Like,
Well, I mean, this is World of Darkness, where the Shadow Court and Pentex and the Black Spiral Dancers and the Nefandi can all get together and have, like,
it's true.
friendly chat.
And in the world of darkness, you're playing a monster, and so radical self acceptance would be a monstrosity. I just wish
Yeah,
it wasn't tied to this is the house that gets like
yeah.
vestigial wings and stuff like that. You know?
Well, the vestigial wings and the horns and whatever I'm cool with. It's the clubfoot or something.
Yeah.
That's where it gets.
Patagia maybe instead of vestigial.
If anything, that gets, like, complete overlap with what Dougal could have done, especially before C20. That's where it.
Yeah. Anyway, other strategies for handling this kind of thing. I mean, we do have physical flaws in the game for things like blind, deaf, etc.
Hmm.
I do sometimes wish those were handled in a more nuanced way because it's
Yeah.
just such similar to how labels of neurodivergence can go in lots of different
Yeah.
directions. A physical label,
I mean, there is what Chronicles of Darkness did, which is also similar to what Fate and other games do, and Nobilis does. A lot of, where it's not a point, something to do with character creation. It does something in play.
mm,
So if it negatively affects your character, that means something mechanically in terms of you get some kind of bonus or something. And
yeah,
that would
perhaps.
be one way of handling it. But it's kind of a general problem with flaws, not even just this type of thing. Like,
Yeah. One advantage I think that the World of Darkness has over something like, I guess, Dungeons and Dragons is that there's less investment in really like the physical layout of the world. Like nobody I know really uses a
hmm,
battle map for, well, unless you're playing Vampire. But
What?
you know what I mean? Like, you don't have to worry so much about, like, can this character cross the same distance as this character can in the same amount of
Mm.
time? Can this character notice the sound in the distance as well? You just give them a difficulty and tell them to roll, you know?
Okay, see, that actually came up a lot for me from my LARP experience,
Mm.
where in some, I mean, a bit less so for Vampire or Changeling LARP versus some other LARPs, but it's almost as if you are the mini in the battle map.
Whoa. Yeah, but kind of, yeah. Like, you don't have that bird's eye view. You're meant to be getting into the mindset of your character
Hmm.
and just
Yeah,
responding in a way according to the story. So any kind of physical quantitative, I mean physical diversity, there's not really any need to do comparisons like how many points is this worth, how many points is that worth. Yeah,
yeah.
it may give you a difficulty penalty on perception rolls or something. A storyteller can very easily just wing that.
Here's the secret about mechanics in the world of darkness. They're a social construct, and I don't just mean that in terms of people made them. Like,
Shots fired.
the impact that they have at the table, it's way more important how everybody feels about how these mechanics are applying
Hmm.
than whatever the numbers turn into, because there is no, this is not some finely built machine, intricate machine of mechanics where everything works together great. No, just, you can just fudge things. And I'm not even talking about like hiding dice, but just like fudge, like, let's say this is +2 this time, or let's
Yeah.
go with this, and it's fine.
The golden rule should have the corollary. Maybe it does have the corollary. And if it doesn't, this can be, I
Yeah,
don't know, the electrum rule or something, where
yeah,
the books tell you if something doesn't work, feel free to change it. But remember also that somebody's discomfort or somebody's suggestion is a completely valid reason that something doesn't work, and
yeah.
therefore change it.
Yeah, like, my big problem with the golden rule is not about changing the rules. It's about saying the storytellers complete control the rules
Mm.
and the players aren't. Like, the table, the group.
Everyone has that rule.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
table should be happy with what happens, right? And if there's a problem happening at the table should address it, and I'll adjust the rules as needed.
Yeah.
And this is very important in this topic, but among others.
I also want, as a storyteller, that everyone feels they can speak in good faith about, if they have a problem with something. This is getting into, lines and veils territory, but if someone has an experience that may not be apparent, to trust them, that, believe what they're saying. I want for everyone to believe what each other is saying about
Hmm.
their sense of these topics in a game.
Yep.
But I don't
Yeah,
know.
this
Maybe
gets,
that's asking too much.
yeah. I mean, this gets into the wider concept of safety tools
Yeah,
and
yeah.
just group communication and inter group dynamics and all. Like, just making sure everybody, you're all supposed to be having a positive experience, and if somebody's not, that's a problem that everybody should be working to address. But
Yeah. There's something to be said about body horror in there. I'm just not sure what it
yeah,
is.
I'm not sure how it connects. I can think of ways it could connect to the topic here, but it's.
Well, just in terms of, like, because it's changeling, you know?
Hmm.
So you might have your entire mouth erased from your face. And
Hmm.
like there's not really a human experience that corresponds exactly to
Yeah,
that.
it's like,
So,
oh, you're now 3 inches tall. Hmm.
right. So like I guess what I want to say is you don't know what choices you make for the story in that vein, which are perfectly in line with fairy tales, and etc. Like, oh, suddenly you have one eye and your wife has 100, or whatever that tale is.
Hmm.
Like, you don't know how that might tie into somebody's experience. So,
And you might not know how to tie into your experience until it happens.
yeah. Anyway, this has turned into a broader comment about ST tools.
Yeah, I think all our episodes do that.
Yeah. There are a few references in at least the C20, I mean, throughout the line, but specifically with C20. There's the Bellerophon Foundation, which everybody seems to know about.
Hmm.
It's funny because they have like a single paragraph or something in there. There's the Roots and Leaves Conclave. Is that it? Yeah, here it is. Like, so right after the Bellerophon Foundation, you also have the Roots and Leaves Conclave, who I guess it's like a Gwyneth Paltrow goop satire.
Hmm.
And then the Renewal and Faith Fellowships, which is like a conversion camp. So it's interesting because you have kind of like the medicalized, the celebrified, and the
Hmm.
doctrinaire approaches to I guess, how nonconformity is being handled.
Yep.
But yeah, it seems to me like people are okay with this being in the game.
I mean, the way people play, the type of role playing game that Changeling is, having dangerous antagonists who are antithetical to your existence kind of is a good thing to have in the game.
Hmm.
Sort of on the mortal scale, more mortal scale versus like some sort of rampaging dragon, I think
Yeah.
works for Changeling.
Yeah, I agree with that. I guess I would like there to be a little bit more variety.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Or you mean variety in terms of, we talked about the mental health professionals that aren't terrible.
Yeah, well, I'd like some groups of mortals who are generally supportive. and
Yeah,
maybe
that would be good. Yeah.
a few more outlets that are neutral, you
Yeah.
know.
I'm not sure how you could do a supportive group that would know about changelings, though. That feels, maybe you could. But...
It would be really great if there were one that didn't need to.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know whether that's an art camp or a music school or
Mm-hmm.
space camp or whatever else, but
Yeah, and they had a lot more of those in previous books, but there's
they
not.
weren't contextualized by this though.
No. Part of us is just they made it abridged, and they're going to put in the scary antagonists more than the
Yeah.
pleasant place you can hang out at.
That was one of the most interesting things about Victorian Mage, weirdly, when I was reading that with Terry, is that they introduced this concept. I forget if it wasn't sanctum, it was something else. But each tradition had, in some cases, it was a place, in some cases, it was an umbral realm. My favorite was the Sahajiya, where it was just like writing on walls around London. But whenever the tradition mage encountered that, it was just like, have a moment, chill out.
Hmm.
And it didn't have like, I don't think there was any game benefit. It was just like, this is your happy place, just like a little spiritual recharge. And it took up like 5 pages. Did it need to be in there? Not really, I don't think, but
Mm-hmm.
I was glad of it. So
Yeah, in general, just the nice parts of it being a change. Like, why do you want to not become undone or forget
yeah,
who you are? That would be more good. That would be good. But
people talk about how the gothic punk element of World of Darkness, I mean, sometimes you really have to squint to see it.
yeah,
I do wish Changeling had leaned a little bit more into hope punk.
yep,
I think C20 does, but it could a little bit more. So yeah, I think there's a whole package of thoughts and possibilities around both of these concepts. Take them or leave them, really.
yep. Awareness of these topics is important for sure.
Yeah. And a willingness to keep like learning more and being willing to grow your own experience.
Mm-hmm. Did we want to finish up?
Yeah, I like I said, I'm just winging it.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I think we're come to a good conclusion at this point.
yes.
So you can find us at changelingthepodcast.com. You can join our Hop in Discord at discord.me/CTP. You can now find us on YouTube. We post regularly every episode. Just look for Changeling the Podcast there. You can send us a toot on Mastodon, changelingpod at dice.camp. And then we're also on Facebook, Changeling the Podcast. And you can send us an email, podcast at changelingthepodcast.com. I think we'll have to be careful with joining any other social media going forward because otherwise this outro would take too long.
Can you do it all in one breath next time? Just
I'll
go
try.
for it. And all of the links will be in the show notes to this episode.
Yep. And once again, I'm Josh.
I continue to be known as Buka.
And remember, a society where everyone hears really well and can only speak with a whisper would only be a disability when framed in a different society with different norms.
And the ones who mind don't matter, and the ones who matter don't mind. Given the real-world gravity of this week's topic, it felt a bit weird to do the usual breezy outro, so hopefully it suffices to say we appreciate your taking the time to listen. We encourage everyone to do more learning on these and other topics in order to create a more supportive and diverse gaming experience for all. As always, additional appreciation goes out to our patrons who include Derek, Dorkadas, Ellerus, Hugo the Bogperson, Iabull, Jason Vines, Oreo, Raz Caboose, Soundjigger, Sija, Terry Robinson, and Tricerabeth. If you'd like to support our show so we can continue bringing you Fae-flavored content, please consider stopping by our Patreon and signing up at www.patreon.com/changelingthepodcast. You can also click like and subscribe if you're listening on YouTube, or leave a review on the podcast listening platform of your greatest convenience. Once again, thanks for listening. Don't let anyone tell you that you aren't a beautiful and unique creature, and until next time, keep on dreaming.